Epic Empowerment is now in the game. I know a lot of players have been looking forward to this. I want to give some huge disclaimers as well as 6 specific Epic champions you do not want to empower, at least before you know this information. Now, one that I want to empower is Obro, but unfortunately I can't get her to +4. Honestly, one of my biggest concerns about Epic Empowerment is that players are going to start focusing on Epic Empowerment over Faction Guardians. I cannot tell you how many times I've been into players' accounts where they have legendary champions, no Faction Guardians filled out whatsoever, but they have +1, +2, +3, so on and so forth. Do not do that, guys. Prioritize your Faction Guardians. Most factions have multiple champions, multiple epics who could be used, so it's something you want to consider. But maybe for Demon Spawn, you don't use all the epics. Maybe you only use Allure, so maybe you could justify +4ing her. But honestly, if you don't know with 100% certainty that's the case, I would 100% of the time recommend focusing Faction Guardians over going for Epic Empowerment. Really, it feels bad whenever I see accounts where they have tons of legendaries, Faction Guardians not filled, but a lot of +1 and +2. So that's number one thing. Prioritize Faction Guardians over Epic Empowerment. Number 2 is champions who are going to break your speed tunes in clan boss, break your speed tunes maybe in dungeon farming. Be very hesitant to actually +2 them or +4 them, because +2 and +4 is when you're going to be getting the extra speed bonuses. The speed bonuses are what's going to ruin your teams. Now, possibly if you're doing things like a budget Maneater, possibly getting extra HP, getting extra defense could actually break your teams as well. If you have a stun target, now all of a sudden it's not your stun target because the champion has 40% extra defense, something like that. So be very careful when it comes to your clan boss champions as well as your Faction Guardians. Now, as far as the 6 specific epics that I do not recommend empowering, well, let's start off with the most popular champion, probably even recommend it to empower. That's going to be Geomancer. Now, you may be wondering, why are you recommending not empowering Geomancer? He's going to get extra accuracy, extra resistance possibly, extra speed. It's going to be much easier to build. Well, the issue comes that for most players needing to empower Geomancer are probably going to be using a few copies of him. So for Iron Twins, I use a Geomancer still, I believe, in my team. I still use a Geomancer there. For the longest time, I used a Geomancer in my Hydra. Now, he's not going to be pushing your highest damage teams, but a lot of players are still using him apparently. Okay, so here we go. Nightmare team, I believe, there, using Geomancer. Geomancer there. These are probably not the same Geomancers as is in Iron Twins currently. So a lot of players are using Geomancer in multiple areas. So if you went in thinking, okay, I need a lot of accuracy, let's go ahead and +4 him. Now all of a sudden you +4 your Geomancer or +3 him, and you all of a sudden don't have an extra Geomancer for those different areas of the games where you can actually use him. So epic champions who deserve empowerment are sometimes worth considering. Will I or do I need extra copies of this champion? Because you don't want to waste the extra copies if you're going to use the dupes in different areas. Number 1 being Geomancer. Number 2 champion, let's talk about Inquisitor Shamael. So this one right here is super important. This is probably going to be one player's first few empowered champions if you have several copies of him. I will empower him a little bit, but he's a champion who, if you don't have Duchess, if you don't have Rector Drath, he is the champion who is the go-to for answering the Head of Torment. So if you are doing Nightmare, Brutal, and Hard, or even Brutal, Hard, and Normal, you're going to want to have an answer for the Head of Torment, and Inquisitor Shamael is an easy slot in for that. He cleanses the fears, boosts the turn meter of the lead champion, and is really an amazing champion. So with that said, you may think, okay, well, I want to empower this champion to +3, +4. Well, now all of a sudden, you have no more copies of Inquisitor Shamael, when before, keeping 3 copies very well could be useful for your account. Now, if you have Duchess, if you have Rector Drath, you may only need 2 copies, but for me, for example, I use Inquisitor Shamael, I believe, in 2 teams. This one's not an actual team, but I'll probably be using him in 2 teams, so I need at least 2 copies of him. Come in here, let's see how many copies of him I actually have. Also, keep in mind, Faction Guardians, very, very important thing there. But if you see Shamael, well, I got plenty of copies of him. This is the Master Vault as well as the Reserve Vault, so I could +2 my main one. But if I did anything else, well, now I'm cutting into my actual Shamaels that I'm going to be using in my 2 teams. I have a few copies of Duchess, I have a few copies of Rector Drath, so I don't necessarily need that many copies of Shamael. But it's something you're going to want to consider. Don't get rid of your Shamaels if you only have 2 or even 3 copies. Really, +1 isn't that much worth it. So consider that as well. If you're only going to +1 a champion, and you have 3 copies of him, maybe just save that 3rd copy because you may end up using it in Hydra. Of course, if you decide you're not going to, you don't have to keep it around, but just to be mindful that, and Shamael is definitely a champion who is viable with 3 copies. Shamael is a champion who every now and then gains some popularity in the arena. To be honest, his arena build and his Hydra build would be pretty similar, but his A2 ignores a lot of defense if he has buffs, well, 100% defense if he has enough buffs for him, and it hits really hard. So he does do well in the arena, So it may be worth saving an extra Shamael for the arena, but to be honest, your Hydra one should work pretty well in the arena as well. So Shamael, number 2 epic, I'd be very careful before going in empowering, and I wouldn't do it initially. I wouldn't do it right off the bat unless you have all your stuff situated. The next champion is going to be also a Sacred Order champion, and this one I was kind of up in the air and on the fence about, but Godseeker is a champion who is S level, top tier, for Sand Devil. So in Sand Devil, you use Godseeker plus another damage dealer, you have a solid team. Now outside of Sand Devil, her build is probably going to be a lot different if you want to use her in maybe Amius for the Cursed City. Maybe you want to use her for Hydra. It's going to be most likely a very different build than what you would do for Sand Devil. Now for me, I don't need extra copies of her, but to be honest, I don't really need to empower her. However, she is a champion who is both, one, very enticing to empower because you're going to get extra HP, extra defense, extra resistance, and extra accuracy, about 40 extra accuracy and resistance if you take her to +4, and she's a champion who needs all of those stats to perform well in Sand Devil because the biggest thing is getting her to be tanky, getting her enough speed. So if you're able to empower her, she's going to be very powerful. It's going to make a big difference in the gear requirements for your Sand Devil team. However, if you're in the part of the game where you need some good res champions, you need some good support for Hydra, so on and so forth, she's a void champion. So before going and empowering her, make sure you think, hey, I may never be able to pull another Godseeker, or at least for a very long time. So is it really worth it going all the way to +4? Maybe you just need an extra 20 resistance. She doesn't need accuracy. Well, not really. I think her A2 does something that could use accuracy, reduce the duration of debuffs maybe. But mainly it's resistance you're going for. Yeah, so she could use some accuracy, but mainly it's resistance, which you're typically going to be looking for, I'm sure. And so when you're going to empower her, just consider that. Maybe instead of going all in with the dupes of her, maybe just use a few and save one for other potential content in the future because she is used for some, more cheesy runs where you have the lead champion res, so on and so forth, because her kit is pretty awesome. She reses, resets the cooldowns, and then she, if somebody's about to die, she places Revival and Death on them and brings them back. So very cool stuff, very interesting kit, and she's a champion who I'd be hesitant on getting rid of all the copies of just to empower one who's going to be used in Sand Devil most likely. Now the next champion is Uugo. So Uugo is a champion who is very good in Hydra. And I'll show you guys in a minute the different Hydra setups that we have. Actually, let's do it now. I have a lot of people in my clan who I can almost guarantee are using Uugo. There's Uugo, there's Uugo. There's Uugo, there's Uugo. You can see she's in every single difficulty in my team, my clan. Game Killer is using 2 copies of her and 3 copies. So right now he is using 3 copies of her. She is a champion who also benefits from everything. She benefits from accuracy, benefits from extra HP and defense, benefits from extra speed, not so much from resistance and attack and all that kind of stuff. But if you got her to +4, the stat bonuses to the HP makes her heal bigger, extra speed makes her get more turns, of course, and extra accuracy means it's easier to place your debuffs, so you could essentially build for more defense and HP. With that said, she's a champion who you're gonna want to have multiple copies of her if you don't have the ability to bring block buffs or decrease defense AoE on a different champion. So for me, I go +3 here. I personally don't use multiple copies of her. I think I only use 1 copy of her currently, so doing this would be fine for me, but for most players out there, you probably will be using multiple copies of her. If you don't have a Sun Wukong, if you don't have an Archbishop Penthroy, if you don't have other good block buff champions, you're most likely going to be using Uugo. She's the most easily accessible of the block buff champion, I'd say, assuming you don't have Wukong, of course. He was free, but he's not anymore. So Uugo is definitely a champion you want to consider keeping. Also, she's probably one of the champions who's filling out a lot of the Faction Guardian slots because if you have dupes of her, she's an easy one to keep because you probably were using a lot of her anyways. So if you take her out, she may actually break your Faction Guardians, which is another thing to consider. Next champion is going to be also another Ogre Trap champion. That's going to be Maneater. Now, Maneater is a champion who I would hope players would not empower him anyways because of how powerful he is. He unlocks unkillable teams for you in clan boss, but I'm not for sure about that because I've seen some people do some suspicious things. So if you only have 1 Maneater and you pull another one, don't empower the one. You build a new team. Like you can build a bad eater team. Now, outside of 2 Maneaters, do you really need more? Probably not. Though there are some areas you could use a Maneater. He does have a good kit. He does that turn meter, fully depletes the target's turn meter, fills his champion's turn meter equal to the amount the target loses. So he has a good skill there. Has a good A3. But the Maneater that you use in Clan Boss is probably going to be a similar build to the Maneater that you use in other content if you do use a Maneater. So as long as you have 2 of them, you could probably empower the future ones and really not be at much of a loss. But Maneater is a champion who you definitely want to reconsider before you go in and start empowering the champion, especially do not just +1 him. save the extra copy of him because that unlocks Bat Eater, that unlocks so much other stuff. You definitely do not want to get rid of your second copy of Maneater. I've seen people feed him, so it does not surprise me, or will not surprise me, if somebody goes in and empowers him. Now, the last champions are going to be kind of two champions. Now, these champions are ones that I personally don't use anymore, but these are also champions that may be enticing to empower, but I would actually not recommend initially. So that's going to be two champions that are max HP. It's going to be Husk and Royal Guard. Now, Royal Guard right here, he's a champion who in Hydra, you often use two copies. You also use a copy in Hydra, maybe in Spider. Maybe they're different builds. Maybe the speed has to be a little different. Similar thing with Husk. Now, both of these champions are very powerful in Hydra teams as far as pushing a lot of teams to higher damage overall. I don't know where Husk is at, but he's somewhere in the account. Is he undead? I think he is. So Husk, he benefits from accuracy from the provoke on the A1. He benefits from more HP, make him more sustainable, more speed, more crit damage. All that stuff helps him. However, with enemy max HP champions, you're not going to do extra damage, right? If you're hitting the cap, you're always going to hit the cap. With Husk, you just need more crit damage because his ability only scales on enemy max HP. So more crit damage, more defense ignore, he's going to hit enemy max HP. There's nothing you can add to him that's going to make him do more damage. For stage 21 plus, you're capped by 10% of the enemy max HP anyways. So if you go in and start empowering Husk and Royal Guard, well, now all of a sudden you lose those dupes that you could use in your different Hydra difficulties because both those champions are pretty popular. I wouldn't be surprised if we have one already being used. No Husk, no Royal Guard there. None. And hard, none, and Royal Guard. So there's a Royal Guard right there. He's a champion who contributes to a lot of damage, oftentimes for players, but he's a champion who I would not recommend rushing to +4 because you possibly could be using him in your Spider 10 hard. He works very well there, same thing as Husk, but he also works in other areas of the game if you're looking for. He works well in, specifically Royal Guard works well in Dark Fae. And while you may be able to make the Hydra one work in Dark Fae, it may be more specific builds in these other areas. You may have to go lower speed than what you do in Hydra. So those are champions I would not recommend empowering right off the bat. Geomancer, Shamael, Godseeker, Uugo, Maneater, Royal Guard, and Husk. If you have any other champions that you think should be saved for dupes, that shouldn't be empowered right off the bat, let me know. Because I'm sure there's more. I went through here, champions like Venomage, champions like Ornn, I think are fine being empowered because typically you only use one copy of those anyways. But champions like I said, the ones I just mentioned are champions I would not empower until you know for certain that you're not going to be using these champions in any other areas because these champions in those areas are oftentimes the keys to actually get you through it, get you to it, and really make it reasonably finished in a reasonable amount of time. Especially, Shamael unlocks Hydra at an easier level. Uugo makes Hydra much easier as well. Honestly, they're all so good. Geomancer, use him in multiple spots. For me, I don't use Geomancer very many spots anymore, so I could do that. But you're going to take a look at your account, figure out what you're doing, figure out where the requirements are, and really think about if it's worth it for you to empower. Either way, guys, let me know what other champions you would not recommend empowering. Definitely interested in hearing it down in the comment section below. I think this is very important information. Hopefully you guys haven't ran out and made this mistake already because the empowerment's already been in the game for a little while and people may have rushed out to actually empower their champions. Honestly, I'd be slow to empower your champions. Unless you're a massive Kraken whale, this doesn't apply to you anyways, then I would be very slow to empower your champions. You would not even imagine how many times I've seen people empower champions that there's no reason to. The faction guarding gets messed up. You could have used a champion for something else. There's really no reason to even do it. The champion's not going to bring anything different to your account. You could use it as food, which may even be better for you. I don't know. I mean, some epics make more sense than others. And some epics like, I don't know, random epics, you're really not going to do that much with it. It may just be better with food. For me, I have a lot of epics at 5 stars, so I'm going to be using those as food most likely. Either way, guys, thank you all for watching. Love and appreciate all of you. Best of luck, and catch you in the next one.